The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Take me out to the ball game. Mike, they've been asking, we've been getting letters that I don't do enough singing intros. Today, we're, of course, talking to Flavio Volpe, the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, and an avid baseball guy and car guy. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of baseball song.
Well, I mean, truth be told, yeah, you've definitely toned it back on the singing in the intro. And I think given how, we saw how Flavio incorporated baseball through, a lot of his answers. And I think we touched on baseball at the end of the conversation. I think he'll allow it. I think he'll appreciate that intro. What did you make of that conversation with Flavio?
I mean, I said it when we were talking to him. I wish we had hours and hours to talk to this fella because there's a lot of really important things and important perspectives that he said about specifically where we're going with EV supply chain and how it is an opportunity and how we could hopefully, more likely than not, make the right choices as a country to get the most benefit out of it. But very fascinating talk with Flavio.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly was eating it up as well. I think especially some of his candor on, when we talked about how, especially up north here and, in other parts of the province, like critical minerals, battery electric, it's all the rage right now. And everyone's, I think, optimistic about that. But I think, his point about we have to have these deep societal conversations around how are we actually going to accommodate this and make it all happen. So I think it's really good food for thought as we kind of move forward with this very exciting time that we're in, but also a lot of stuff needs to happen. A lot of stuff needs to go right, I think, for us to really capitalize on what could be a really transformative opportunity, not only for Ontario, but for the country.
For sure. And I mean, you and I are at CIM next week. And actually, when you hear this, CIM will have already passed, but we will have been at CIM. And of course, this will be going towards the BEV in-depth Minds to Mobility conference that we're hosting in Sudbury on May 25th and 26th. So I think this is a very apropos guest we've had on, and I think it's a really important topic that's not going anywhere.
You got to get that plug in about the conference. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the person that's going to say it best is Flavio Volpe. So let's go talk to him. We are now joined by Flavio Volpe. Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, the APMA, and it is an internationally recognized champion of Canada's automotive industry. Flavio holds a master's in business administration from Schulich Business School at York University and a bachelor's degree in international relations from U of T. He proudly leads the APMA, Canada's national association representing original equipment suppliers to the worldwide automotive industry. Working closely with officials in Ottawa, Washington, and Mexico City during the 2017-2019 NAFTA renegotiations, he led the effort to secure an unexpected and unprecedented increase in regional value content for Canadian automotive suppliers in the new USMCA. A passionate leader, his response to the Prime Minister's call to action for a net zero emission economy by 2050, and this was really interesting, was to launch an all-Canadian zero-emission lightweight concept vehicle to debut in 2022, described by the Globe and Mail as an audacious play to build an all-Canadian electric car. APMA's Project Arrow was revealed in the CSE in 2020 in Las Vegas. And we want to hear so much more about that and everything else going on. Flavio Volpe, thanks for joining us on the Unlikely Innovators.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So that's your professional bio, but what we like to start with our guests is more sort of, what would you tell us if we were in a bar, of how you went from basically getting a BA in international relations to now becoming the president of the APMA? What kind of winding road was that?
What kind of bar conversation is that? You guys need a better pickup line than that. I'm a car guy. I love cars. I'm a baseball coach. I'm a father of three. I'm Italian. Actually, that doesn't mix with the baseball part, but it does mix with the car part. And so I spent my 20s wasting money on cars that I had to fix. And so then I spent my 30s spending new money that I was making on cars with warranties that were faster than the cars I had to fix. And then now I've spent most of my 40s representing the companies that make the parts that I personally made rich over the years, and building our own car. I took a job in government in '07, chief of staff to the Minister of Economic Development in Ontario, and it was really the auto file. And so every time you guys hear about, negotiations with General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, Honda, Toyota, that's where we were. One of the main files that we had there at the time is we were chasing an Italian company called Fiat before the world fell apart and it became part of Fiat Chrysler and then part of Stellantis. And we really, really, really came close to landing a $2 billion plant in Chatham, on Bloomfield Road in Chatham. History will have forgotten that effort. But if we had done that, we'd had the Europeans here. But I spent a lot of time hanging around Turin, meetings in crazy places like Milan and Rome and Paris, and in helicopters hanging up over pieces of land in Strathroy and where Strathroy, Chatham, Vaughan, Windsor, Tecumseh, and then as far out as London. I had to land that helicopter at some closed airport because we ran into a thunderstorm and had to take a $200 taxi back to Toronto so I could make it to a TFC game. But all in that, the all-encompassing passion for the product got me saying yes to this job. First no, then yes to this job when it was offered. And it's the longest I've ever done anything. I usually do stuff for 3 or 4 years, but we're in year 8 here. And, you said it, Steve, we're making our own car. But I love the car business. It's easy. It's easy, that old cliche that people say, find something you love and it doesn't feel like work. I never really believed that, but until now. No.
Yeah, we were actually going to ask a question about how you got into the automotive industry, but it seems like you were born to be in the automotive industry.
Yeah. I don't know if I was born to be there, but boy, you're not going to get me out. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that obviously I think given your passion for fixing cars, it makes sense that you would have got into it. But I was just curious in terms of your formal education, getting a BA in international relations, like has that helped you presumably, with the trade missions you've done? Like, do you ever think back to that and, maybe this all lined up perfectly? I got my passion for cars and also got some international relations training. Like, how did that fit in?
My father was a member of parliament for 23 years and he was a minister in the Martin government. And ironically, he had the, in those days, the government would choose who the lead minister was for a province. He was the lead minister for Ontario. And at the time, 2003, 2004, the feds for the first time had gotten into business with General Motors and Ford and Chrysler. I'd say to him at the dinner table, what are we talking about? You just gave $100 million to Ford, one of the biggest companies in the world. Can't they afford it? And we kind of walked through it, and he really kind of walked me through this, the thinking that, like, the auto companies are a little bit like major league franchises. You want a franchise, you got to pay for it. And then when you have it, you still got to pay that payroll every year. And then you got to compete. And, in every league other than the North American one, if you end up in the last few places, you get relegated. Yeah. And so you got to stay in the business and really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, some of that international relations training. And then when I did my MBA, I specialized in international business. It kind of brought it to ground. I was one of those guys that did their MBA in those last years where I think maybe mine was the last intake class where you could do it right out of undergrad. So I had this MBA at 22 years old, probably the youngest graduate at the Schulich School of Business. I should check that. And I'll tell you, it was useless because you have no practical experience to turn around and use some of that theory on. But, it took a few years and, let's fast forward 10 years after I graduated, taking that job in government and seeing that, we could pull Ontario into a different league, whether that was Fiat or whether that was Volkswagen or whether that was Volvo. No, we lost on those, but we came pretty damn close, learned some lessons there. But I was able to turn around and use some of that formal education, Mike, in some of those international entanglements, which you might know, a lot of that is formal, but then most of the work gets done when you go for dinner or for drinks after. And boy, you better be sharp. You better understand the world. And usually when they're making $2 billion bets, you probably got 3 or 4 different options. comes down to who can I trust on the other side? Because I really don't know any of these people. I'm making an investment from Turin into Toluca, Mexico, or Chatham, Ontario, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it really, everybody's a pro. Everybody's got money on the table, but it's who speaks my language.
I find that fascinating, sort of the inside. It's and that dinner meeting, that's the real meeting, right? That's
That's right.
that's when you get the real business done. In view of that, so you have companies, that are choosing around the world and looking at the different sort of auto zones around the world.
Yeah.
What do you think differentiates the Canadian auto sector? What is in the sales tool belt when you're talking to companies and trying to convince them that Canada and Ontario more specifically is the place to be for this?
Do you know the jurisdictions, subnational and national, that can play are, there isn't much difference between them. It's like picking between, on any given night, the Blue Jays, the Red Sox, the Rays, and the Yankees. They're all four big teams. And tonight, the Red Sox pitcher might be hot and you're in trouble. Over the course of a long baseball season, usually quality demonstrates itself. So over the course of a long season, in Canada, in this electrification of the automotive sector, I actually had a meeting with one of the world's biggest OEMs yesterday, and I had one last week with one of the world's most famous OEMs, neither of which I'll name, but probably by the end of this session, you'll figure it out. Both of them turned around and said, okay, look, I don't think we're going to get to 100% electrification by 2035, like everybody says. We're probably only going to get halfway there. But we understand we're not going to push against the current. So they're focusing on a cradle to grave discussion. In that cradle to grave discussion, how can Canada help? And things that are starting to get a lot of traction when I talk to people is, if you're doing stuff in Quebec, the energy mix is 100% carbon free. If you're going to do it in Ontario, it's 94% carbon free. It is, everybody talks about the price of energy, but I think with this trend, the unstoppable trend on ESG, it's well, what are you going to pay for? Then you've got a lot of the critical minerals required in volume in the ground in those two jurisdictions. You've got a federal government that's just committed $4 billion, $3.8 billion to the pro forma, the value proposition on extraction and turning it to cells. And then, you've got proximity to where you're going to package it and or put it in a vehicle. So we've got the greenest footprint matched with the largest potential reserve of extractable minerals, closest to the biggest manufacturing cluster in automotive. Let's call it Ontario, Michigan. And it starts to make a real difference. It makes a difference. Like in the car business, in 1975, the U.S. federal government decided to do corporate average fuel economy standards and said, look, we just came through an oil crisis. We were headed into another one. We've got to make some sense of this. If you're going to sell 1 million cars or 100,000 cars, you got to average 18 miles per gallon. And not the 5 individual models, your sales. And that number only increased by 50% from 1975 to 2011 to 27 miles per gallon. And so the consumer said, well, I want a big car. North American consumers, I want a big car and I want torque. People think they want power, it's torque. And if I can't get in a car, I'm going to get in a truck. And the corporate average fuel economy for a truck was lower than a car. And that's why you've got this great pickup truck market. These people aren't all working with their trucks. They enjoy driving trucks. And people always ask me, well, when do you think electric vehicles or whatever other variant of zero emissions is going to pick up? And I said, you're going to have to regulate it, and then you're going to have to subsidize it, because that's not what consumers want. You could convince them that an electric vehicle has as much torque or more torque than an internal combustion one, But you got these weird models like the Mitsubishi i-MiEV, and God bless the Chevy Volt. When Chevrolet came out with the Volt, I mean, it was technological tour de force. People didn't buy them. They didn't care. They don't buy
Yeah.
them. But now the world is moving, and every major jurisdiction says, okay, look, auto companies, you can't sell internal combustion somewhere in the 2030s or 2040s. And by the way, we're going to co-invest with you. We've got an industrial policy. We're going to help pay for that capital investment, and we're going to pay for extraction, and we're going to pay consumers to buy them. And so now the market's moving, and you're seeing every single OEM, every single car maker fall over each other and say, no, I will have my full range electric. No, I will. 3 days ago we saw, or 2 days ago, we saw Chevrolet with a surprise announcement. We've got an electrified Corvette coming,
I saw
and
that.
then a full electric one.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that? And so now things are moving, but it isn't driven by the market. It's driven by regulators. And one thing I know about regulators is that they don't follow through. So they got to stick with it. If you're going to say 2035, then don't change course to 2026 and 2027, because automotive companies, car makers, and parts makers are seeking hundreds of billions of dollars into the transition. And if you relent, maybe you got to drag some people there now, but if you relent, you're going to break some balance sheets.
And you kind of touched on this when you were talking about obviously the shift towards electrification. And I think, Steve and I are located up here in Sudbury, Ontario, where, we're talking a lot about those critical minerals. And we were part of a funding announcement not that long ago.
I saw
that was going to bring a network. It was the tagline that I remember was that for the first time in 120 years, Northern Ontario is going to be connected to the auto sector, right? That was one of the sound bites from that announcement. So it's everywhere. And we had the announcement about the battery plant, in Windsor not that long ago. But in terms of what this all means and what the opportunity, that exists for Ontario and Canada, presuming that, the regulators follow through and everything kind of comes into place, like how do you see that opportunity, coming to bear for the province and for Canada?
So first, let me tell you why I think we're not going to get to 100% electrification, and that we need to be sanguine about these things. In a past life, I had a job where I priced the monthly rent in 24,000 suites in a portfolio of rental buildings across the country. I don't know where those 24,000 people or the 50,000 people that live in those 24,000 suites are going to charge their car. And here in Toronto, anybody who lives in the old part of the city, and let's call it 1 million of them, they have street parking. And it's random. You show up, maybe I park in front of my house today, maybe I'm down the street tomorrow. I don't know where they're going to charge. And if the rest of us plugged in, we blow the transformer or we overload the transmission station today. So we have to have a really, really thoughtful society-wide look, if this isn't a vehicle strategy, but it's part of our climate strategy, then how do we get to 100%? Well, we got to figure out that charging infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And there's no easy answers. So maybe we need to talk to the oil and gas people who run distribution centers called gas stations, where people are used to showing up and filling up their cars. Maybe they go up and they have a quick charge. So we should be investing in quick charging. We should be partnering with the current infrastructure. We make 2 million cars a year in this country. If 2%, which is what we're at now, 2 or 3%, are electric, it's a pinprick. It's actually not enough scalable volume to turn around and say to that lithium mine up in Northern Ontario, we've got an anchor order for you. So mining companies are not charities. No one's going to do anything on spec. Extraction is incredibly tough from a regulatory standpoint and expensive. And then you're not going to take it out and then hope to sell it. You need to work that. There has to be a symbiotic relationship with at the very least, the refiners or someone who's making cells. And no one's going to do that from a cell perspective unless they have the sales. So there's a role here. If the regulators are pushing us into sales from 2% to 20 to 40, then we probably need to use the federal treasury or the provincial treasury to make those extraction propositions whole. It's a grant program, a loan program. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a tax treatment that frees up risk capital. I don't know what it is, but we need to do something, because you can't chicken and egg this thing. Because I'll tell you what, the chicken will win. It isn't, oh, well, I'm not sure. I'm sure, that absolutely no publicly traded company is going to throw money away when they've got to report quarterly. And no private company is going to turn around and blow their wad and lose their lender. And so we need to do that. We spent a lot of time talking to American regulators, and we had an interesting conversation with the White House a couple of weeks ago where we were saying Canada does not have the risk capital quantums that flow in the U.S. for tax reasons and also a culture of risk. But we do have the minerals you need. And so from an energy security point of view, why don't you use some of that industrial policy where you've announced $180 billion into that space to do a joint strategy with Canada, which they're working on. And then from an automaker point of view, listen, I represent volume suppliers. We don't design the cars, we supply to them. If General Motors is going to build pickup trucks in Oshawa and they're going to sell $400,000 a year and I make seats, that's a great customer to have. I don't really care what's under the hood. And so if you say to General Motors they have to make electric cars there and they sell 40,000 a year, you are really kind of ruining the volume that pays my bills. And so we have to be thoughtful about these things. Now, if we do all of that, the best proposition we have for Canada is the two drivers for electric cars, which really are a platform for autonomous and connected cars. Okay, so 100 kilowatt battery in a Project Arrow is a 400 volt platform that enables all kinds of technology versus the 12 volt battery in the car I drove in this morning that turns on a 40 volt system. It's the mining sector in Canada being able to identify, prove, extract the thousands of millions of tons of lithium oxide, hydroxide, of nickel, of graphite, of cobalt, and know that it has an upstream refining capacity locally that is being bought by LG, who's going to make cells there. And then when we make those cars here, and we can connect them to the 20,000 IT companies in this, and I'm pointing outside my window towards Kitchener and Waterloo, we have a very unique proposition. It is 100% true that Northern Ontario, the mining sector, all those towns up there like yours, and the ones far north from yours and east of yours are the critical enablers in making Canada the capital of zero emission vehicles. But it is absolutely true that we could screw that up, and we probably will. And unless we look at this holistically, we will, because we don't have a Canadian OEM. There isn't some Canadian car company headquartered in Toronto that says, we're going to do it here. We have foreign automakers who say it's a great place to do it here, but we can be incentivized somewhere else.
I have like a million questions that just came from that section you just talked about. But I mean, it ranges from obviously wanting to ask more questions about, God, hypothetically, what a subsidization of extraction would look like. We haven't done that since the war, right? Where we were building for war production, right? It would be so interesting to talk more about that, and that could be like that sounds like crazy if you're a miner, because you never get that kind of look from the government, right?
No.
Building essentially a bridge to nowhere on the backs of a regulatory framework that you're hoping they make good on. But maybe that is a solution. I think that's a really interesting proposition. Is there any other? This is sort of I hadn't planned to talk about this, but have you seen anything like that anywhere else with regards to like subsidizing extraction for something like this? I find it a really interesting prospect.
Yeah, China.
Yeah, China. Yeah.
And it's a funny answer to that question, except that that's the competition. So right now we're saying, if you talk to any automaker who will speak to you candid over one of those dinners that we talked about, and say the US federal government is pushing companies to have 50% electric vehicles by 2030. The Canadian government is saying 100% by 2035. Where are they going to get their cells? And they're going to get their cells from Asia. And where the critical minerals come from? Well, ostensibly, they're coming from China. And in China, they have a 4,000-year arc. return on investment expectations are completely different. They are global domination. How do you put a price on that? By the way, people don't have to vote for whether they think your policy is the right one or not. They are centrally planned. Oh, you want to pick a candidate? Great. Here's 7 from our party. Pick this one. You choose your own. Here's the policy direction. And I think I don't say it to be dismissive. I say it to wake people up to who you're competing with. If you think market forces are going to profitably pay for the extraction and refinement of mineral resources in Northern Ontario on spec, you're on drugs. And who's got the heft? Who's got the balance sheet to take that speculative run? Well, it has to be the regulator that says you need to do it. Otherwise, we're forcing purchases from another country. And now you say the last time you heard of that was in war. Reality, war is the state is making a decision to direct its resources in one direction, its industrial capacity in one direction for a specific outcome. Well, that's what we're doing here, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll tell you that at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a lesson here. At the beginning of the pandemic, middle of March 2020, I'm watching the news, you're watching the news. I hear export controls from the EU and China for PPE and ventilators as COVID hits the shores here. And at the time, I think we're all COVID, we all have COVID fatigue, but we didn't have fatigue then. Italy had just shut down. New York City looked like, the day of the zombies. And everybody was afraid that this thing was going to kill us immediately. And the things that we needed to get in the way, there was no talk of vaccine at the time, were things made other places. And I called the province and I called the feds and said, I represent companies that have 1,400 factories, 100,000 people. Maybe we can make this stuff. Give me the specs and the volumes and I'll get back to you in a week. And we were so galvanized by this crisis, society-wide. And within 3 weeks, we were making ASTM level 3 masks. And we were making NIOSH face shields. We made swabs, we made gowns, we made ventilators, $350 million worth within 6 weeks. It can be done. Most of the companies started without a purchase order, but the government had promised very publicly, with me standing beside the premier, and then of course with the prime minister, saying, look, we'll pay for the tooling. We need this stuff. Get it done. And we got it done. Now, everybody says, wow, 350 million. That's like 2 days worth of production, 3 days worth of production, automotive. It was nothing for us to do. We had the capacity to do it. We have the capacity to extract the minerals required. We have the know-how. We have the companies. Can we scale? Look, everybody's got a labor issue, but best way to fix your labor issue is to pay for it. Okay. Can we do it? We have a government that says we have a climate crisis, and I don't argue with them. Governments around the world have agreed that this climate crisis is going to push them to EVs. Well, some of them have agreed that they're going to finance it. This one has the federal government has partially agreed. The provincial government has partially agreed. Provincial government said, our place is in the capital required to make cars and parts. We're not going to give you consumer incentives. We think we'll do our part. The feds can do that part. The feds announced in the last budget, we got $3.8 billion for mines to mobility. Some of that, of course, is for facilitating extraction. But I think you gentlemen know, certainly the mining industry knows, 3.8 billion sounds like a lot in Toronto at my laptop talking to you two guys. 38 billion probably does it. 300 billion probably does it. We have to be able to galvanize people and tell them that we'll meet that objective no matter what. We will not back off the deadlines, our guidances, and we should do things like talk to the Americans, which we're doing. When I talk to the Americans, they didn't want to hear about my issues with you probably hear me sometimes talking about our trade disputes. They don't want to hear it. They don't care. You turn around and say, do you understand that China is the problem? Writ large, okay? Security issues, industry, infrastructure capital, they spread around the world. that gets them influence at the United Nations. All the smart things. I mean, China's not stupid. All the smart things you do when you're trying to take over from the US. Do you hear us when we say that, the Americans? Sometimes you got to buy F-35s, even though you think you don't need them, because you got to buy some tokens with the Americans. Well, with the Americans, what I've always said is, and I'm talking from the White House on down, we have the critical minerals. We don't have the capital to deploy. We have increasing encroachment of state-owned enterprises from China seeking to buy mining companies in Canada that trigger the Investment Review Act, that trigger a rejection or a debate from the industry minister. And then we got to hear you guys complain. Well, these are publicly traded companies for the most part, have a fiduciary obligation to bring a bid to their shareholders and to their directors. The best way to beat them, the best way for your energy security is, let's do a continental strategy and let's have American money extracting those minerals out of the ground and facilitating that refinement. And we'll pay our share and make sure that a lot of that refinement and that cell manufacture happens in Canada. But otherwise, hey, the only way it's going to happen is through Chinese capital, and then you can't moralize over it.
Is that something? So when that I think is somewhat revolutionary, right? I want you to talk about Project Arrow, so I don't want to get too sidetracked because we have you for a finite amount of time. So maybe we'll wait for a beer sometime. But I think it seems incredible for American money to then pay for extraction. But I think if you're the shift in focus is thinking about it continentally, I think that I think is the key. But are the Americans open to that kind of regime?
Sure they are.
Yeah.
Sure they are. But they're also no different from our elected politicians. And this isn't a derogatory statement. It's say, look, if I'm gonna deploy treasury money, I want that upstream benefit in terms of jobs and capital investment in the US.
Right.
And so, and by the way, Canada doesn't own the mining resources. I mean, Canadian firms who pay for those rights own them, or foreign firms operating in Canada subject to Canadian law.
Yeah.
So it isn't a negotiation between the White House and the Prime Minister's office, in as much as it is, look, if you agree, then you should work on a bilateral strategy and put it under the umbrella of energy security.
Yeah.
And then go from there. You know, I'm going to be really humble about this. It doesn't matter what I say, but I do know that the federal government and the US federal government are having very specific discussions on how that would look. No guarantees, but how that would look.
Yeah. That's
and what we do is we add a little bit of, it sounds revolutionary, except that there are 156 factories in the US owned by Canadian auto parts companies that employ 43,000 people in 18 states. Our business is continental. It doesn't, I mean, we have 124 factories in Mexico with the same amount of employees. Canadian part suppliers employ more Americans and Mexicans than they do Canadians in Canada. And that's just the nature of the business. And so for us, when we say have a critical mineral strategy that's continental, it's because Americans are invested north-south the whole way, and the Mexicans are increasingly starting to invest in the other two countries.
Could you, and I think just for expediency, you did mention, and I did in your intro, your bio, can we talk about, you mentioned the lack of a Canadian-based sort of automotive company with it.
Yep.
Could you talk about the work you're doing with Project Arrow? It seems like you're trying to prove a point.
Thank you for that, because that is exactly what I'm trying to do. To be honest, no one's ever said that. The Prime Minister invited me to a throne speech in as his guest in December 2019. The throne speech said, "I'm going to challenge industry at large to be net zero by 2050, but also show me what you can do by for 2025." Came back to the office, and for years we'd been doing technology demonstration projects based on Ontario-built Lexuses in partnership with Toyota, which Toyota, for a Japanese manufacturer, has had an incredible leadership role in Canadian auto innovation. So they gave us some Lexuses, and we put new commercially ready technology on them, and then we take them to to technology demonstrations, all the other automakers. Well, when I came back from that throne speech, we got this big poster here in the office that shows that in Canada, we do every single parts category. And I said, well, why don't we make our own car? And, we laughed and we laughed. And then we had a couple of drinks over lunch. And then we laughed a little bit more and laughed. And then we started to say, well, what if we ran a design competition and went right to the beginning and said, Canadian post-secondary students, not their schools, but student teams. And then we looked at who our friends were. And one of our friends was the head of design for Stellantis, a kid who born in Haiti, grew up in Montreal, sent a letter to Chrysler at the time with some sketches. His mom did, actually. And they said, well, Ralph is pretty talented. Let's have him down here. And then they sent him to university down there, and he designs the 300 Charger Challenger that gets built in Brampton. And now he's this great global star. He agrees to be our design chief judge. And we launched at CES in 2020, Consumer Electronics Show, that we're going to do this. Very quiet launch. We had 24 submissions. We picked one. projectaero.ca, your listeners, your viewers can see it. And then we said it's a moonshot. We're going to design, engineer, and build Canada's first all-Canadian zero-emission vehicle, and not on paper, not a clay model, a concept prototype vehicle built to 2025 motor vehicle safety standards. I had a couple conversations with friends of mine, and they ended up joining us. One was a former chief technical officer at McLaren, and the other one was the current Aston Martin Special Vehicles chief engineer, special projects chief engineer. He just finished doing the Valkyrie, and we said, what if you did a prime minister supported, premier supported project here in Canada? We don't have any OEMs. Long and short of it, he said yes. So we hired him, and we ran an RFP for, look, do you want to be part of it? You're either a Canadian company with commercially ready technology, or you're a foreign company, but your Canadian operations has commercially ready technology. Bid on the project. I thought we were going to get 120 companies. In the end, it was 534.
Wow.
We are now going to build this thing. We've chosen the 55, 60 that are going to be on the car. 250 are going to be part of a virtual model. It's being built this summer. It will be unveiled in December. And it is, I joke that it's the most expensive business card ever made, but it is. I'm going to show you, Steve and Mike, what a Canadian zero emission powertrain is. And if you like it, I'm going to introduce you to the company that built it. And by the way, hopefully you buy some from them. Level 3 autonomous. There's going to be a lot of firsts, and I don't want to scoop myself on this, but we enable, because we're able to do it from a clean sheet. And by the way, nobody would do this. You're not going to strand $20 million, $25 million on a car that doesn't go into production. We can. I'm the trade association. We got some federal money, we got some provincial money, and then all these companies that count on us to be able to go out and sell them. I'm so excited about this project. I had 3 meetings in the last 4 weeks with OEMs that you all know. One of them is Italian, who said, we want to see that. And help me to understand your battery solution and your aluminum solution. Tell me about your additive manufacturing. We're doing something crazy here. We're saying most of the cyber orientation on new vehicles is about protecting against theft. And what we're saying is, on a 400 or 800 volt platform, it's going to enable so much technology. How do you protect the data? Because we think that data isn't just a security issue. We think it's an asset to sell. We think that that somewhere along the line, a future sales model on a vehicle is like going to get your cell phone. You're going to drive 24,000 kilometers. You can do that for 11 years. That's 3 terabytes worth of data. Are you willing to give me that data? I'm willing to subsidize your car. Oh, your car is going to be zero emissions. The price of carbon in 2026, 2030 is going to be $180 a ton, $250 a ton. Your car displaces 4.3. The average car puts up 4.3 metric tons a year. You know what? I'm going to pay you for your 50 metric tons of carbon displacement credits in advance. And so all of those things, what's really important is, wow, okay, so hold on. I may or may not be paying for the vehicle. I may or may not have some obligations to travel. What is very important is you have to put those miles on to get those credits or to gather that data. Well, we've got 7-layer cyber security in that vehicle for everything from vehicle theft to data theft to the way it interacts with other vehicles to the way it interacts with the infrastructure. And we think we don't have a Canadian OEM, but this is a Canadian demonstration vehicle. So we don't need an OEM to have built this incredible cluster of suppliers in every single facet. And I'm going to show you the car, and you're going to ask follow-up questions, and they're going to be answered by the guys and girls who put that technology together. And hopefully it leads to, $25 million build turns into $2.5 billion of sales for those companies. And maybe inspires some students to turn around and say,
no kidding.
Why can't we launch a car company? The usual answer is because you're crazy, because you don't have the billions. But we got micro manufacturing. There are other contract manufacturers, different ways to do it. But we hope this car inspires not just the equity players that are calling me to say, hey, listen, can we set up a car company? But the teenagers and the 20-year-olds right now say, tell me again why we can't do anything.
I made the connection now, and it's embarrassing, but I'll admit it anyway, that obviously I was aware of Project Arrow before we started talking, but after having heard you talk about the Canadian made and inspiring people, like the name has to come from like the Avro Arrow project, or I'm a student of history. So it's, there we go.
There you go.
There it is.
Yeah.
There you go. I'll tell you, we sat around here, we said, well, what are we going to call this project? And we had a couple pretty fun names to start with. And I said, look, I mean, I'm a student of history. Mike, I think you just said that you are, and you probably are too, Steve.
Yeah.
There's so much angst in the Avro Arrow project, but move the angst aside. It's with a clean sheet. The federal government, the Canadian Air Force said, we need these specs. We've got this amount of money. Show me what you got. And these crazy people at Avro came up with something that flew twice as high and 2 to 5 times as fast as anything that came before it. And they built 5 of them so that it wasn't bullshit, or whatever the 1957 equivalent of PowerPoint was. They were building a 6th one. I think they put the 6th one in the air, and then geopolitics took over. Their customer disappeared. But a couple of dozen of them put Americans in space and then on the moon. A dozen of them went over and worked on that other Delta Wing aircraft in England that took passengers across the Atlantic for 30 years in 3.5 hours. And we said, if this is a real clean sheet, if it comes from an original Canadian design, let's call it Project Arrow and see if we can avenge some of that.
So cool.
The tragedy there.
Yeah. Take back the name. Yeah.
Take it
sure.
back. Yeah.
No, we definitely love that. That's for sure. It's definitely I think every Canadian history course I've ever taken or taught, you always pause on the Arrow and you talk about the brain drain. So if you can keep it all here, that would be great. But one of the other things I wanted to ask you is that, we found you on Twitter. We were obviously aware that you existed before Twitter, but that's kind of the conduit that led us to this conversation today. Cause you were actually, you posed a question about a podcast, and I said, well, we've got a podcast. You should come on our pod. But you're obviously very active on Twitter and social media, as am I, and as is Steve. Can you maybe talk about how, important social media is for you in terms of getting your message out there?
I'll tell you, my predecessor in this job was an honorable human being, and so was his. And he worked in a different world where we said, what's important is to get the Canadian technology suppliers together and put them in front of car companies and their purchasing agents and do the proper commercial networking that kind of gets you more business. By the time I took over, the world had been broken. I took over in 2014. We were just coming out of the Great Recession, and all those car companies had pulled all that purchasing into places like Detroit and Tokyo. And there were no more purchasing offices here in Canada. So who are you going to get people together with? And, from my background in family history and government, and then I worked in government, I remembered that at 6 o'clock in the morning every day, you'd get a stack of the clippings. if you worked in the Ministry of Economic Development, where the major companies, where the minister was mentioned, what competitors are doing, you read it by 7 o'clock. The minister usually loses her mind by 8 or 9, and she's got to go into question period at 10:30. So whatever is scheduled for that morning is now canceled. She's got to go past the press scrum. She's got to better have a good answer. And I remember rescheduling everything for a lot of different scenarios there. And I thought, look, the one condition I'd have to do this job is let me do media. And if you don't like where I go on media, then stop me after. But I can't. This stuff moves fast. People need to file stories. I need to be able to get into the clip so we change the agenda. And so we did. And humbly, I think people listen in automotive when we speak. There's an evolution, of course, in media. And maybe I wouldn't include Facebook in this or Instagram, although everybody's there. Twitter is a little bit like a newswire. There's only 80 million users, but every journalist is on there. Every government official is on there. And we thought it was quite important to turn around and say, look, the stuff that we say, and I have a great board that allows me to be rather candid, as you probably could see here. I'm going to do that on Twitter. I'm going to be really candid on Twitter. And what started happening probably around 2015, 2016, my tweets started making stories, like getting into stories during the NAFTA negotiations. And then like 2018, 2019, some of my tweets started becoming stories. And so you realize that 280 characters is very powerful, because the editors who are making the decisions in the morning to turn around and see what they're covering, or journalists who are sitting there saying, I don't file daily, I file every third or fourth day. Who's a mover and shaker? And if I can be candid on Twitter and say, hey, by the way, I just had a meeting at the White House, or by the way, I just had a engineering meeting on Aero, or by the way, I'm going to correct you on the record, call you out right now in front of everybody on something. It's a really good way of getting out there. Now, it's full of garbage. Twitter is it's like a bullshit wood chipper. Okay. And I think that's why there's you have this this blue check mark, which nobody will give one to me, but they started to say, okay, look, how do we determine, at the very least, who's real and who isn't? Not an endorsement of what their message is, but we got a little bit of a following there, and that following is very helpful in me being able to put out urgent messages, not with angst, but like if you want to know what I'm thinking, Mike and Steve, just check Twitter today.
Yeah.
And you just got to be. Somebody called me politically unafraid, and I corrected them. There's a journalist, you're politically unafraid. I go, well, I'm not a politician. I'm not elected. I'm not responsible to a stakeholder group other than the 200 companies that elect me, but I'm making sure that everybody hears what's important. And then we also use Twitter. I think one of the things that we've done differently over the last 5 years, especially, is, okay, you got to stop only opening your mouth when you need something or when you've got an objection. If this is the biggest industry in the province and one of the 2 or 3 biggest in the country, then do your part for society. And so we stepped up to make PPE during COVID. We stepped up to solve the Ambassador Bridge blockade. We stepped up during the Afghan crisis and the Ukrainian crisis. Say, look, we've got jobs. We could fill them with newcomers. Send them to us, and we'll set them up together. And I use Twitter for real-time feedback on that. And also it's being able to, if you contribute to society, and society doesn't always say to you, man, you're always here asking for something, or you're always here complaining. No, in a proper modern society, you've got to contribute from an economic point of view, but you got to also contribute from a social point of view and a political point of view. And so Twitter just happens to be the tip of my iceberg.
And I mean, when we thought about asking you that question, obviously Twitter's changed a lot in the last maybe couple of weeks, right? Especially on the battery electric automotive side of things. But we'll see how that all plays out in the coming months and years, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think you asked me at the outset how long do these recordings usually go, and I said half an hour. So we've already kept you 20 minutes longer. But wanted to finish a bit with a bit of fun, and that is to say, you've already brought up baseball metaphors throughout some of the things you've said. It seems from the research we did on you, baseball has been a really big part of your life as a player, as a coach, as a parent of a baseball player of baseball players. Could you just talk like a little bit about maybe how that's intersected with your sort of business life and if it has at all, and how's that served you well in your career so far?
People get tired of my baseball analogies. That's the intersection. But I'll tell you, last week, my older son got invited. We're dual citizens, Canadian and Italians. He got invited to try out for the Italian national 18U team that's headed to the World Cup this year. And so,
Awesome.
so we went out to Italy last week. And while I go, well, I'm going to be in market. I asked for a Project Aero meeting with a major Italian automaker, and just kind of a roll of the dice. And you know what? They gave it to me. And so I took the boys there. I had the whole leadership team of that company in for an hour and a half. And we've got follow-up already coming this week for some of that Canadian technology. In that meeting, I said to them, I think one of the challenges, I don't know if you guys know anything about World Baseball, but World Baseball Classic is like the World Cup for baseball. And it's usually just the MLBers who decide what nation they're from. And I said, the Italian team just kind of borrows jerseys, and they say to Joey Gallo, "I'll see you in Taiwan." I said, well, you probably should remind these guys, or maybe for the first time show third and fourth generation Italians what Italy's all about. And can we have them come over to this car company? You can imagine who I'm talking about, in an experience tour. And they're like, yeah, we'd love to get in that. And so, I we have a major tournament coming up in Atlanta in June. The boys, I coach a 17, 18U team of real college prospects. I'm going to stop in and see Porsche when I'm down there. I got a meeting with one of the senators from Alabama, because he was a big baseball, football fan. And so we started on football, and I rolled into baseball, and he made an introduction for one of my boys for a college showcase. And so it's just one of those, I'm really passionate about it, as you can probably see. But I'm an old coach. I played college ball, but I started coaching when I was 16 or 17. And, it's kind of the way that I think, maybe we should get some of my staff in here, kind of the way that I manage, same way that I coach. Say, look, I'm going to drive you pretty hard on skills development, but when we're in the game, like, I'm on your team and I'm with you. We prepped you, you're out there, you go take your shot. And I'll encourage you to take your shot. And if you fall, in as much as I can, I'll help. But you'll never not know who the coach is and if he's behind you. And we built a hell of a team here. I took over here. I think we had 5 people. We're now, I should actually know this number, maybe 18. But we built a hell of a team on Project Aero. And, we pulled in some heavy hitters, man. We pulled in some strong arms. People are dying to play for us. And because it's not because it's a winning team. We haven't won anything yet, but it's this crazy culture of like, yeah, we'll go play the Yankees. No problem. Let's give it a shot.
I love it, because especially the skills development analogy that, you got to push your people hard, but obviously when, you're in the game, you're on the same team, you're working towards that same goal. But Steve will say that I'm a huge hockey guy, and maybe I'm not using enough hockey at work, because to be honest, like, I think I could, Steve. So we'll see. And Steve's a football guy, so maybe we just need to kind of latch onto that more. The thing I was going to say to kind of bring things out was that in terms of, on my hockey side of things, I got to get better at like kind of using them to my advantage. I had a meeting with an industry partner here locally a few years ago, and Wayne Gretzky called me in the middle of the meeting because I was supposed to do an interview, and I screened the phone call because I thought the industry partner took priority, which she did. But everyone's like, it was Wayne Gretzky. There's an exception to be made for the great one. So I learned that lesson pretty good.
Oh yeah. Look, those are great stories, but it also says to that industry partner how much you care about what you guys are talking about and going through. And Mike Piazza is the general manager of the Italian national team, one of the top 100 players of all time. And he called me in the middle of a meeting with the company I was trying to pitch him to, and I screened him. And he said to me, "You're screening me? I'm calling a guy. I'm in the auto business. And if you knew the guy who I'm talking to right now, he's the Mike Piazza of the auto business. So I'll call you after."
Yeah.
It's just you gotta have fun in life. You You
For
gotta,
sure.
a lot of people will tell you that. Somebody gave me some advice once. Said, look, if you're all in, it means you got no friends or you got a few friends. You're up early. You go to sleep late. You're misunderstood. Yeah, those things can be true. And certainly, especially when you're establishing yourself, you should make more of those decisions than others. But we got one spin around this planet, and everybody's born and everybody dies. There's only thing that matters how we treat each other. So when you get to that point where you got a few gray hairs in your beard and your hairline's a little bit higher than it was when you started out, you don't have to be a hard ass. You have to show the generation that's coming up behind you where they need to work really hard, how to foster their ideas and their innovative spirit and that defiance that comes with youth, and then remind them that, you know what, there's going to be some years where you're going to enjoy the fruits of your labor, and you really should. And otherwise, it's a lonely life, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I could conceive of a better place to end than that. So I want to thank you again, Flavio, for joining us. And we really look forward to seeing some of those things you couldn't tell us about today in the news and on your Twitter in the coming weeks and months.
I assure you, they will not be a secret when they can't be a secret. And then I'll tell you what, you guys had me back on when the Arrow was done. And that's December this year. And we'll walk you through the Arrow.
Awesome.
And then I'll tell you about all those companies I couldn't tell you about if you haven't already read it on my Twitter account.
Hey,
awesome.
Sounds good. We'll book it.
Okay, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Take
our
care.
pleasure. Steve, the Avro Arrow. Did you,
my.
let me ask you this, because obviously we were familiar with Project Arrow before we chatted with Flavio today, but did you make the connection?
I don't want to embarrass you, but I did.
Okay. So yeah, I'm the worst.
No, you're good. I mean, I think it's not immediately obvious, but I think that of course, being students of history as we both are, read that with reverence when it happened. Still waiting for those Beaumark missiles to take their place, I guess, but that's a little inside joke for those who know the history really well. But the Dan Aykroyd miniseries is where it really sort of became visceral for me. I don't know if you remember that Canadian-made.
Yeah, of course. And then they distilled it down into a Heritage Minute as well.
That's right.
So I mean, it was definitely canon for me. Yeah, no, I was embarrassed to bring it up because I think when you just see Arrow, you're like, okay, well, that could probably mean a whole bunch of different things. But once you started to get into, Canadian made and, Canadian inspired, I was like, well, of course this is the Avro Arrow, right? And I think, to his point, if we're able to, I think, avenge, that the brain drain from the Arrow, and it still, I think, did a lot of good, but obviously we didn't get to realize and actualize it here in Canada, then that's great. So I mean, we'll definitely take him up on his offer of coming back. We haven't had a guest return to the podcast yet. We've so we don't have any Mount Rushmore guests yet where they've had multiple appearances. Flavio might be the first. We'll see.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great guest to have back on. And I mean, I want to sit in the driver's seat of that thing and see what it's all about. I think that maybe this is what I'll leave you with, Mike. You're familiar, of course, with the sort of, I guess it'd be urban legend at this point, that one of the last Avro Arrows landed somewhere in Northern Ontario is in a barn somewhere that someone's hiding. Do you put any stock into that, or should we get in my pickup truck now and go look for it?
I was going to say that I bet it's in a stair. That you probably know where it is.
Oh, I would not bring it up if it was so close to home. I'm of course from a small hamlet outside the city of Sudbury.
But that would be the exact reason why you would bring it up, so that you would throw off the possibility that you, Steve Gravel, of course, know where the last remaining Avro Arrow is. It's in your dad's garage somewhere.
Well, I could say this. I don't think
in his hangar. It would be pretty obvious if your
my dad has a hangar with no airstrip.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think nothing will tease the podcast more than if we use the promo. Steve knows where the last Avro Arrow is. So maybe we'll leave it there. But thanks again for Flavio for coming on. It was a great conversation, and we'll see you all next time.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.